Hey guys, Joe here with JoeMartinMVC. Today we're going to go over how to restore severely oxidized headlights using sanding and a few polishing methods and get them back to a fully clear finish, and how to protect them afterward. Remember, if you like the content I put out, to like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you stay up to date with new content as it comes out. Let's get started. So for this project, we're going to need quite a few items to do it right. We're going to start with 220 grit wet dry sandpaper, 400 grit wet dry sandpaper, 800 grit, 1500 grit, as well as 1500 grit and 2000 grit sanding blocks, 3000 grit foam backed wet dry sandpaper, Meguiar's dual action polisher with both a 3 and 5 inch backing plate, a wool cutting pad, Meguiar's 3 inch microfiber cutting disc and finishing disc, Optimum no rinse, Meguiar's clay bar, ceramic coating and applicator pads, both 1 and 2 inch masking tape, Optimum hyper compound, Optimum's hyper polish, and lastly water and isopropyl alcohol mixed together. And before we begin, just a quick show of just how bad this headlight is. Rather severe oxidation. Before we can begin, we're going to take our Optimum no rinse and liberally spray the area, then use our clay bar to remove the surface level contaminants, as well as go around the surrounding areas as well. Then we just have to dry the whole area for when we mask it off, as it won't stick if it's wet or moist at all. And now my favorite part, masking it off. This will be sped up 4 times, as you don't need to watch me mask for 5 whole minutes. Since we're going to be using sandpaper, it is extremely important that we mask everything off extremely well, leaving no paint exposed at all, as the sandpaper will damage the paint immediately. I take the 1 inch tape and make sure it goes underneath the headlight, and add another layer directly under it. Once I have it fully outlined with the 1 inch, I go back with the 2 inch tape to give myself an extra buffer for when I'm sanding, so I can't hit the paint at all. Now we're going to take our bucket of water and all of our wet dry sandpapers, fold them in half, and let them soak in the bucket for around 3 minutes before we begin. We're going to start off with 220 grit wet dry sandpaper. This will be sped up 4 times, so this video isn't too ridiculously long. You want to start as least aggressive as possible and work your way up through the grits. I honestly could have started at 400 or 600, been fine, but for the sake of the video, start as low as you should ever need to go. The main thing to focus on is making sure that you only go one direction with your sandpaper. In my case with the 220, I made sure to only go horizontally. When I move on to the 400 next, I'll only do vertical passes. The main reason for this is it makes it to where you can make sure you get all of the sanding marks from the prior grid out before moving on. If you go the same direction, you wouldn't be able to tell Same with if you do circular motions. Occasionally you should also spray off the headlight and wipe it off to see where you're at. I'm just using my O&R to clean the residue off and then wipe it off with the microfiber cloth. Next up is the 400 grit wet dry sandpaper. There's not too much to talk about here as it's just sanding again, so it's also sped up by 4 times. The main thing is making sure to go in the opposite direction from the prior grit. So in this case I'll be going vertically, which really strains your arms when you're doing such a small area. Every so often go ahead and wipe off the headlight and check to see if you can see any horizontal scratches left from the 220 grit. Once they're all gone, it's time to clean it off and move on to the next sandpaper, in this case 800 grit. With the 800, since this one is the disc, we're going to fold it into fourths, into a triangle. This sandpaper can work as a wet dry, but it's really designed more for dry. I do eventually spray the surface with O&R just to get a little bit of lubrication without soaking the paper. Main thing here is going over our prior sanding marks in the opposite direction, horizontal for this one, and keep at it until you can no longer see the 400 grit marks. Ideally would be to only do 1 or 2 stages of increase with grits, so either 500 or 600 instead of 3 stages to the 800, but I don't have any 500 or 600. The only real drawback is it does take longer to remove the lower grit scratches with such a high grit sandpaper, but it's completely doable. Once you're all done, rinse it off and wipe it off, inspect it, and let's move on to our next grit. And next is 1500, another 3-stage jump, the prior 2 stages being 1000 and 1200. But I don't have those. Now these wet dry sanding blocks, these things are amazing. I absolutely love them. I wish I had them for all of my grits, but they don't seem to make them readily available in lower grits, unfortunately. They help you get a far more even sanding due to the thick foam in them, and it just really helps out. The main thing with the 1500 here is going vertically, opposite of our prior sanding, and frequently dipping the block to clean off the excess residue. We're finally just about done with sanding as we move on to our 2000 grit sanding block. This will be another horizontal pass, and as you can see, now that we're moving up to the higher grits, the headlight is finally starting to clear up some. You can technically stop after 1500, polish with the buffer, and spray a 2K clear coat onto the headlight and be done, as the 2K clear will actually fill in 1200 plus grit scratches and make it look beautiful. Since we're not using a 2K clear for this, since I don't like wasting $20 on a single use can and using only a quart of it, we need to keep going. And final bit of sanding, 3000 grit foam back sandpaper, also awesome stuff. Now since this is the final grit, we can actually use a circular motion and really spend some time, make sure all of the prior sanding marks are out, as this is the final sanding that we'll be doing. After this, it's time to move on to our buffer and then compound and polish the headlight. Whenever you sand, unless you go to some ridiculously high grits such as 5000 plus, you're going to become friends with a wool pad. I really hate these things as they tend to sling polish everywhere, and the lower quality ones, which this one is, will also sling wool everywhere too. I really need to invest in a 3-inch one if I can find it, as the 5.5-inch one that I have here is a bit too large for headlights. We're using Optimum's Hyper Compound, as it can easily remove the sanding marks with the wool pad, but it would be even more efficient with Optimum's wool pad, which just really works extremely well with their system. I just don't have one yet. We're going to do a few passes, really make sure to get every nook and cranny, and you can see the headlight really begins clearing up from this step forward. One thing to be extremely careful of when you're using wool pad and doing this is the heat that is generated from the pad. Wool pads can get extremely hot, extremely quickly, and it can easily damage a headlight. Also, whenever you're using a pad too large for a job like this, it absolutely loves to rip up your tape, which you can see happen here. Fortunately, since we're not sanding anymore, it's not as big of a concern, but the wool pad can cut through the paint pretty quickly if you're not careful. Now that we're done with the wool pad, we're going to switch over to our 3-inch backing plate and start off with our Meguiar's 3-inch microfiber cutting disc with optimum hyper compound. A couple of key things to be wary of with this. The smaller pads have less grip on them with the Velcro and can fly off rather easily if you don't maintain constant contact with the headlight. The other thing to be wary of is similar to the situation with the wool pads, and that's heat buildup. You'll occasionally see me touch the headlight with the back of my hand just to make sure it's not getting too hot. And then once we're all done with the compound, you can move directly to the Optimum Hyper Polish and finishing pad, as the set is compatible and doesn't need to be wiped off. I only wipe it off here so we can see how the headlight is coming along. And the last bit of actual correction and polishing that we have to do, we grab our Meguiar's 3-inch finishing disc sprayed with Optimum Hyper Polish and slowly work across the whole headlight. You'd think I would have learned from the cutting pad and my general knowledge that these finishing pads are even more likely to fly off, that I would have been a bit more careful, but I let the polisher get a little out of my control and this one flew off too. Time to remove all of the masking tape as we're done with all the sanding, polishing, and compounding. Now we're just going to clean it up and get ready for ceramic coating. We're going to take our IPA, isopropyl alcohol, and spray the whole area, wiping down the headlight and surrounding areas to make sure we have it fully corrected to the point that we're happy with it. The IPA will remove any oils and residues from the surface as well, so that way the ceramic coating will adhere properly. Next up is our ceramic coating, which is actually extremely simple to apply to headlights. Go ahead and put a few drops on your applicator pad and begin applying in a crosshatch pattern, horizontal, vertical, horizontal, ensuring you get every section of the headlight covered. We have to apply a coating over it to ensure that the headlight stays protected from UV radiation and doesn't end up oxidizing again just within a month's time. And as previously mentioned, a 2K clear would be the best thing to use, which is a 2-component clear coat. So clear coat and hardener that you would actually spray on. It's far more durable, has better UV resistance, and actually can fill in minor scratches and swirls as well. And while this is the best thing to do, it's not as cost efficient to use, as a can costs about $20 and it's a single use. Using it will only use about a quarter of the can, so you end up throwing away 3/4 or $16 worth of clear coat. And like always, we just need to level out the ceramic coating with our microfabric cloth, which is done with almost no pressure, just gliding across the surface and removing any high spots. And just to finish off the video here, we have a bit of a close-up showing the perfectly clear and restored headlight, and then compared to the driver's side, which was only compounded and polished in last week's video. I was hoping you'd be able to see the difference on camera, but it's really hard to tell once they're clear. The driver's side still has some notable oxidation that needs to be removed, but the compound and polish still severely increased visibility out of it compared to what it was. Guys, thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions, make sure to put them down in the comments below. As always, if you like content coming out, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell so that way you stay up to date with new content as it comes out. Thanks so much for watching. Take care.